Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Hope you're doing all right. Uh, Good morning and welcome to Psychology 150. I'm streaming from Holden Beach today. How's my stream coming through? I'm getting a little message here on my data streaming program that says that I'm a little bit choppy. Can everyone hear me and see me well enough? It's good to see you, Christine. Good to see you, Suha. Good to see you, April. Am I coming through all right? Fantastic. Okay, good deal. Good deal. If anything happens today and I can't fix it, I'll switch to a recorded broadcast and I'll go home to stream for you Thursday. But hopefully things will go all right. Hope everybody's doing well this morning. Good to see you, Amber. Good to see you, John. Exam 2 is over. Congratulations. I'm glad we're done with it. And I will have them graded by tonight at midnight. I also had exams for my developmental psych class, so I've been grading those for the last 2 days. But I promise I will get to your stuff tonight. Everybody doing well? Okay. So today we're going to be talking about, this week's chapter is on motivation and emotion. So we're going to talk about motivation today, and then we're going to talk about emotion on Thursday. Okay? So today we're going to talk about what motivations are and why they're important, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the major theories of motivation. Okay? So let's go ahead and get started. All right, folks, this is a picture of Alex Honnold. I don't know if any of you have heard of Alex Honnold, but he is the subject of a movie called Free Solo. He is a climber who's been climbing all his life, and he climbed 3,000 feet up the El Capitan cliff without any. I just sent a little chat out there for you to see a little survey to see what your opinion is. And I think I'm getting a no. Come on. How many of you? Surely somebody would try this, right? Maybe not, huh? Looks a little crazy to me. And you might ask the question, why in the world would somebody be willing to do this? This is exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to try to figure out why people do the things they do, right? Okay. So I just ended that poll. Thank you very much for participating in it. So, motivation. This is the difference between humans and computers. See, here's the deal. A computer and a human being both process information. They take in input, they store that input, they process that input, and they spit it back out. What is the difference between a human and a computer? Well, here's the difference. A computer doesn't do anything unless you ask it to do something. On the other hand, human beings are motivated. We choose and select things to do. We try to achieve things. We try to avoid things. Really, the difference between humans and computers is that humans have agency. They decide on things to do. They choose things to do. Agency is the human quality of being goal-driven. An entity with agency evaluates, selects, performs behaviors, and monitors their activity in pursuit of goals. You, my friends, are people with agency. You try to do things, all right? And that's what's going to make you different from computers. Now, nobody really knows how to describe motivation. It's sort of a slippery topic to discuss and define, and you're going to find the same thing on Thursday when we talk about motivations. I'm not really going to give you a hard and set definition. Instead, I'm going to give you some properties that help you to understand that quality. So let's talk about the 4 general properties of motivation. You know what? Motivations, as they are inside of us, instigate activity. They activate our behavior, right? They get us started. Motivations also tell us which direction to go, right? Either we run away from things that we don't like, or we run to things that we do like. So motivations are not only activating, but they are directing as well. And you know what? Motivations sustain our behavior. Why are you going to college? Why are you taking class after class after class? It's because each and every one of you wants to have a degree and get a job related to that degree, right? So your motivation caused you to activate, caused you to sign up for classes at Wake Tech. Your motivation told you which classes to take and which degree to pursue. And your motivation is also going to determine whether or not you stay in this program long enough to get your degree and get your job. And you know what? Motivations also differ in strength. I see some people that won't quit no matter how difficult life becomes, no matter how big the obstacles, they are still going to pursue that degree. Some of you, on the other hand, give up quite easily. You get one bad grade, one bad assignment, and suddenly you're out of the degree, you're out of the program, you're out of the class. So if you think about motivations, it's the difference, it's what makes you different from human beings. And motivations are the things that activate your behavior, choose which direction you're going to go, they sustain your behavior, and they also differ in strength, and that some of you have more motivation than do others. So, Ronique, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us. Christine, no way, you wouldn't climb that cliff. Ronique, we were just talking. This is Alex Honnold. He climbs cliffs without a rope. Would you climb 3,000 foot up this cliff without a rope, Ronique? I know you're a pretty tough guy and ex-military fellow. Would you climb up this rope, up this cliff? Oh, come on. Yeah, you would, Ronique. Neither would I, man. That's some crazy stuff, right? Now, here's the deal. If you look at this chart right here, this is a table of motivational theories that is in the beginning part of chapter 9. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about a theory of motivation we've already covered. It's down at the bottom. It's called incentives theory. Do you remember when we talked about behaviorism several weeks ago when I talked about punishers and reinforcers? Well, if you think about it, human beings seek to avoid punishment and seek to achieve reinforcements. Really, that's a theory of motivation. And so you can think of behaviorism as an incentive-based theory of motivation. Now, here's the deal. Behaviorism is a theory of extrinsic motivation. That is, the motivating factors come from outside of the human being. So, you are taking this class because you want to receive a reinforcement from me and from Wake Tech. You want that good grade. All right, you are being extrinsically motivated. You folks probably go to work every week so that you can get a paycheck. That money is an extrinsic motivator. That is, it is something that comes in from outside and drives your behavior. That's what we'll call an extrinsic theory of motivation. But you know what? Some people are motivated because of things that are inside them. They have intrinsic motivators. Some of you have pride. Some of you are driven by shame. Some of you are driven by the need to achieve. Some of you are driven by a need to be excited or to avoid boredom. These are what we would call intrinsic motivators. So the first thing I want you to understand is the difference in motivators. We have extrinsic motivators and we have intrinsic motivators. And I want you to appreciate the fact that the theory of behaviorism is a theory of extrinsic motivation. Right? Christine Marie's sitting here talking about the cliff, and she's telling me that she wouldn't even go on a ride at the fair anymore. Christine, I have to sort of agree with you. I am not much for heights at all. 10 or 15 feet. It's kind of interesting. When I was a young man, I worked as a carpenter out building houses, and I fell off of a roof about 26 feet down. I wasn't scared of heights before then, but now I can't even get on a ladder. I am so wigged out about heights anymore. So I appreciate you, Christine. I hear the refrigerator in the back starting to hum. Can you still hear me well enough, folks? You can still hear me well enough, can't you? I don't know why the refrigerator started to hum. Okay, so what I'd first like to do is talk to you about what we call the drive reduction theory of motivation. So one of the ways in which human beings are motivated is to maintain balanced states, right? When you don't have oxygen and you start to suffocate, you take a big gulp of air to breathe. When you're hungry, you eat food, and that makes the hunger go away. When you're thirsty, you take a drink of water or a drink of beer or a drink of Kool-Aid. It makes your thirst go away. When you're hot, you go inside and sit in the air conditioning, and that makes the feeling of being hot going away. So one major theory, one biologically based theory of motivation is what we would call the drive reduction theory of motivation. And basically what this suggests is that we have these biological and psychological states of imbalance that initiate biological or behavioral responses designed to reestablish homeostasis or equilibrium. Okay, and this is a theory of intrinsic motivation. Now, if you remember from chapter 2, I talked about this very important brain structure called the hypothalamus. And your hypothalamus is the control center for motivated behavior, what I told you. And basically, what the hypothalamus does is it helps you maintain homeostasis. When you're thirsty, your hypothalamus drives you to drink. When you're hungry, your hypothalamus drives you to eat. When you're hot, your hypothalamus causes biological and behavioral changes to occur to achieve a state of being cool. Or when you're too cold, your hypothalamus drives you to achieve a sense of warmth. So we can think about our hypothalamus as a brain structure that is very important for maintaining homeostasis. Okay, the control center for the motivated behavior. Damage to the, and specifically what I'm going to talk about is how it maintains our feeling of being in the proper temperature. Now, bizarrely enough, different parts of the hypothalamus are responsible for motivating different parts of our behavior. And so if you'll see the note here, I suggested to you that damage to the ventromedial hypothalamus can actually lead to overeating, which is called hyperphagia. And they've done this with mice. You destroy their little ventromedial, the bottom of their hypothalamus in the middle, and it causes them to eat and eat and eat and become super duper fat. Right? Now there's actually a different part of your hypothalamus called the preorbital area, and if you damage that, the person will have difficulty regulating their body temperature. So you can think of this little hypothalamus as the part of your brain that helps you maintain a sense of balance, and it does this by reducing drives that you have. Now let's talk a little bit about maintaining a consistent body temperature. One of the things that separates you from snakes and lizards and other cold-blooded animals is that you and I can control our body temperature, right? So a snake needs the sun to keep warm. A lizard needs the snake, and a frog needs the snake to keep, and a frog needs the sun to keep warm. And in fact, these animals hibernate during the winter, right? They dig down into holes and they stay there for the whole winter because they can't regulate their body temperature. On the other hand, warm-blooded animals like you and I, dogs, cats, and bears have evolved the ability to control our own body temperature. Now, this takes a lot of energy and a lot of food to do this, but it gives us several advantages. It allows us to stay active during the entire year. It means that we can live in cold places or we can live in really, really hot places. So you can move to Ecuador or you can move to Alaska and still stay active all year long because you can maintain your body temperature. And so here's the deal though. Your body systems require that you stay inside a very restricted range. If you get too hot, parts of your body will start dying. If you get too cold, parts of your body will start dying. So it's very important for you as a human to stay in a very restricted range of temperature. Now, how does this work? If you'll remember from chapter 5, I talked about thermoreceptors. Remember, this is the sense that's related to touch. And so I told you all over your body, you have receptors that are responsible for touch, pain, and also heat. Now, the receptors in your body that are responsible for measuring the heat of your body are called thermoreceptors, right? And these are receptors that are in our organs, that are in our spine, and in our brain. And they sense what's known as our core body temperature. Have you ever heard the term core body temperature? Now, you can go outside on a cold day without a jacket and your skin will get super duper cold. And we'll call that your skin body temperature. And your skin can get super cold or super hot and flushed, and that's not a big deal. But the receptors in the middle of your body measure your core body temperature, and they have to keep that temperature in a very, very restricted range. And so your hypothalamus defends this range by initiating biological and behavioral responses to body temperatures outside of the acceptable range. Okay, so thermoreceptors on your skin measure skin temperature, and thermoreceptors in the organ measure your core temperature. Now, the cool thing is your hypothalamus creates both biological and behavioral changes in response to body temperature outside of the defended range. Now, changes to your skin temperature initiate proactive behaviors designed to prevent your core temperature from moving outside of the defended range. So when your skin starts to get cold, you will start engaging in behaviors and biological responses. These things happen even before your core body temperature changes, because we don't want your core body temperature to go outside this range. So you can think about your skin temperatures as being sort of a way for you to begin the drive reduction state in before your core body temperature becomes dangerous to you. Now, what are some of the biological responses that occur when your skin temperature begins to change? Well, have you ever been outside and started shivering because you're cold? Okay, well, what your body is doing is your body is moving the muscles, and moving the muscles creates heat inside your body. It generates heat. If you've ever been working out, if you've ever gone jogging, if you've ever been exercising, you realize that after you exercise vigorously for a while, you get hot and your skin gets flushed. I know you folks have all been sweaty when you've exercised. And that sweaty is because muscle contraction, muscle movement in your body generates heat. Now, it requires a lot of food, but this food is used to create muscle contractions, and these muscle contractions generate heat that keeps your body warm. Now, what else happens? Well, when you get cold or hot, your blood vessels open up or shrink. Now, vasodilation, when you get hot, your blood vessels expand and they get closer to the skin. This allows heat to go from your blood to your skin, which then can be released or decreased by the production of sweat. So when you get hot, your face gets flushed. And basically, that's a biological response initiated by your hypothalamus. It causes your blood vessels to expand, and that's why your face seems red, because you've got blood closer to the surface of your skin. Now, this heat is released into your skin, and then your body produces sweat. Sweat is nothing more than a salty fluid that's on your skin. the wind and outside air blows across that water on your skin, and this helps reduce the heat on the surface of your body. So your core temperature gets too hot, your blood vessels dilate, which brings the heat to the surface of your skin, and sweat then helps reduce that heat that is being released by your blood vessels. On the other hand, when you get super duper cold, your blood vessels constrict. You experience vasoconstriction. And basically what this does is this pulls these blood vessels away from your skin to conserve the heat that is already in your core temperature. So you can think about your hypothalamus as causing these changes, either muscular changes or blood vessel changes, and this helps reduce or increase the amount of heat inside your body. Now, not only do we engage in these biological responses, but there are behavioral responses that are initiated by our hypothalamus. So, animals either seek heat or avoid heat when the weather is cold or hot. So on a cold winter night, if you have a fire outside of your house, a bonfire, and it's cold, what do? You move closer to the fire. If you have an animal, a pet, you're going to notice that your dog or your cat does the same thing. You don't have to teach them how to go towards the heat. Their body is automatically driven by their hypothalamus. And the same thing happens when it gets super duper hot. You and other animals will seek shade, and this is an attempt to maintain that core body temperature within this restricted range. Huddling, which you can think of huddling as basically snuggling. That's just another word for snuggling. And so animals, when they get cold, they go close to one another, and this allows them to share body heat and stay warm. Other animals will engage in tunneling, burrowing, or other kinds of nesting behaviors. These are behavioral responses to core body changes or to surface body changes, which are designed to prevent your core body temperature from going outside of the defended range. Laying down on the ground is another behavioral response to being cold that allows you to conserve warmth. Or if you stand up and stretch out, your goal is to get the wind rushing through your body, helping cool you off. So body positioning is also another behavioral response to changes in the in your surface body temperature and drives of the hypothalamus. And you know what? Human beings also engage in complex behaviors. We've developed these crazy things called clothes, and we know how to put more clothes on or take more clothes off. Actually, it's a little chilly in the beach house this morning, so I've got my jacket on in order to conserve warmth. So you can think about the hypothalamus as maintaining our body temperature inside this defended range. Anybody have any questions so far? Now, there's another theory of motivation that is primarily used in sports psychology. I don't know if any of you are interested in being sports psychologists. Well, one of the things that sports psychology talks about is maintaining optimal arousal. You want your athlete to be motivated and fired up to perform well, but you don't want them to be so uptight and motivated that they get anxious, right? How many of you have heard the term boredom? Anybody ever been bored in here? How many of you have ever been bored? Let's see. So how many of you know what I'm talking about when it comes to being bored, right? Do you like being bored? Hell no, nobody likes to be bored, right? How many of you have ever been terrified. How many of you have ever been terrified before, right? Now, here's the deal. We don't like being bored, and we also don't like being terrified. Human beings have an area where a sweet spot in the middle between bored and terrified. We're going to call that the optimal level of arousal. Okay, now this is a model of intrinsic motivation, homeostasis as well, but it involves more of a psychological state than a physiological state. So the needs, the drive reduction theory basically talks about your hypothalamus evaluating your body systems and creating behaviors and physiological responses to maintain a physiological state. You can think of optimal arousal as being a psychological state of homeostasis. We don't want to be too aroused. We don't want to be under aroused. And so we can think about optimal levels of arousal. Human beings' behaviors are driven to maintain an optimal level of arousal. Now, here's the thing. I will tell you, that guy, Alex Honnold, I showed the picture a little bit earlier. This guy right here, here's a crazy thing. If you show this guy scary pictures, his amygdala doesn't fire up as easily as yours does. It takes way more stimulation to make his amygdala become active. And do you folks remember what the amygdala is responsible for? What emotion does the amygdala control? Can somebody tell me? What's the amygdala responsible for? And I'll wait for an answer here in the chat bar, right? And so it takes more excitement, there you go, to arouse him. So climbing up that cliff would terrify the hell out of me. There is absolutely no way I could do that. I would be totally terrified. He, on the other hand, climbing up that mountain sort of makes him feel normal, if you will. So he's trying to achieve optimal arousal. It's just his optimal arousal is different than yours. So what are some of the applications of optimal arousal? Well, it turns out that some people think that optimal arousal is responsible for personality styles. What they argue is that introverts, it's called the reticular formation, which is sort of a part of the brain. It's an arousal part of the brain that's tied to the amygdala. We didn't talk about it because this is an intro class, but people who are introverts need less stimulation to activate this reticular activating system in their amygdala. And so this is why introverts are quiet and shun activity and excitement, because they don't need it. On the other hand, those of you who are extroverts need higher levels of stimulation in order to achieve optimal arousal. So there are some people who suggest that your personality is dependent upon your biological system and how easy it is to arouse them. Introverts need less stimulation to achieve optimal arousal than do extroverts. You know, actually, when we get to chapter 14 and we talk about psychological disorders, I've got a really crazy video for you called The Dangerous Few. And basically what they suggest is that people who are sociopaths, you know, those psycho killers, those people who have absolutely no sense of empathy and no sense of morality, there is evidence which suggests that those people do not have the ability to achieve normal arousal like most people. So, robbing a bank would terrify you and me. There's no way I would be able to walk into a bank and rob it because I'd be so shaky, right? But what they suggest is that for sociopaths, robbing a bank, hurting somebody, doing something really, really terrible allows their brain to achieve optimal arousal. So maybe that's why some people are sociopaths. And then sports psychologists realize that it's very important that an athlete achieve optimal arousal. And so what they found, there's this really cool phenomenon called the Yerkes-Dodson law that argues that performance is related to arousal in sort of this really interesting way. If we're not aroused enough, we don't perform well. If we are too aroused, we also don't perform well. But there's an area right in the middle where our performance is the best. So if you think about it, if you weren't very aroused and excited about the exam, you wouldn't study for the exam, and then you do poorly. On the other hand, I have lots of students that tell me they have test anxiety. And when they come sit in an exam, they get so nervous that they can't think straight. These people are having difficulty achieving optimal arousal. And so what a sports psychologist does is they help an athlete achieve the appropriate arousal. Now, the crazy thing is, depending upon the sport, you need different levels of arousal. So sports like golf that require small muscles and fine motor control require less arousal for optimal performance than, say, being a linebacker for a football team, which is all about large motor movements and running over people. And so what you're going to find is that different levels of arousal are optimal for different sports. If anybody is interested, what is that fellow's name? Harvey Dorfenstein. I can't remember his name. But one of my favorite sports psychologists, Dorfman. No, I don't think that's right. Let's see, hold on. The mental ABCs of pitching. It is Harveydorfman. Okay, actually, if any of you are interested in this idea of optimal arousal as it relates to sports, there's a great set of books by a fellow named Harveydorfman, who is a sports psychologist that helped a lot of baseball players, which is why I know him. And he is all about helping an athlete understand and maintain the appropriate level of arousal. If you're interested, I highly suggest you check out his book. And so another intrinsic motivation is what we call optimal arousal. People do things so that they can avoid boredom and also avoid terror. They're looking for the optimal level of arousal. Okay? Now, a third theory of intrinsic motivation was developed by Sigmund Freud and his followers. How many of you have ever heard of Sigmund Freud? Any of you know Sigmund Freud? Psychoanalysis, surely you've heard of Sigmund Freud. He is one of the most famous psychologists of all time. And Sigmund Freud developed what we might call a need-based theory. There you go, a need-based theory of motivation. So we'll talk about him a little bit. He's kind of fallen out of favor. But basically, Sigmund Freud and his followers argued that human beings are driven by needs. Now, needs are different than drive reduction because needs never go away, according to Sigmund Freud. They're always there. And so just because you have sex once doesn't mean that sexual need goes away. Just because you do something that makes you feel proud once, your need for achievement doesn't go away. How many of you have a need to make an A in this class? You know, some of you students are not happy unless you make an A in my class. On the other hand, some of you students don't care what grade you make as long as you pass. You can think of that as a need for achievement. Some people are in dire need of perfection. Other people aren't in need of perfection. And we'll suggest that this is a personality style you can actually measure called need for achievement. Okay? Now, a need is a psychological state of deficit that initiates behavior. Needs don't have a point of homeostasis. Instead, they provide a constant source of motivation that drives the individual. Now, I said, I've got, if you'll see this highlighted We're talking about a psychoanalytic theory of need satisfaction. The branch of psychology that Sigmund Freud created that is associated with him is called psychoanalysis. And so psychoanalytic theories are all, if you will, Freudian-based theories of needs satisfaction. And what Sigmund Freud argued was that human beings are driven to do things that feel good, especially have sex. And so Sigmund Freud thought that human beings were driven by this need for sex. He thought everything was related to the sexual impulse. Now, before you write this off and say this is stupid, let's think about this for a moment. Don't you think if you want an organism to survive from generation to generation, what's the most important need that you put in that organism? The need for sex. And why is that so important? Because if an organism is not engaged in sexual behavior, it's not going to pass on its genes to the next generation. It's not going to create offspring. And so Sigmund Freud actually was a Viennese medical doctor. He started out as a medical doctor who believed that human beings are driven by a biological need for sex. All right? Now, he argued that sometimes this need for sex is so overwhelming and runs so counter to what society's rules are that sometimes we even build up anxiety related to sex. And he argues that we engage in protective mechanisms that help hide us from this need. He called these things defense mechanisms. So according to Freud, everybody is driven by a need for sex, day in, day out, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. But you folks all know there are rules about when you can have sex and when you can't have sex, who you can have sex with and who you can't have sex with. And so he argued that when we can't fulfill that sexual instinct, we actually channel it into different activities. And according to Sigmund Freud, all human achievements, all writing achievements, all architectural achievements, all political achievements are caused because human beings couldn't fulfill their sexual needs. Now, if you've ever seen animals, you know that animals are driven and they engage in sexual behavior whenever and however they want. And so Sigmund Freud thought that human beings have this intrinsic need for sexual gratification. Now, there's another fellow similar to Sigmund Freud, but he argued that there's actually a different need that drive people. And this fellow was named Alfred Adler. And he argued that human beings instead are driven by a need to feel competent and powerful, right? And he thought that the inability to achieve this would lead to something called an inferiority complex. Have any of you ever heard of the term inferiority complex? Anybody ever heard that term before? Basically, according to this guy, Alfred Adler, we're all born very, very helpless. Babies are helpless, right? And he argues that this feeling of helpless gets attached into our brain. And our whole life, we're trying to get away from these feelings of helplessness. We're trying to become powerful. And he argued that human beings are driven by a need to feel powerful. And he argued that some people even engage in what he called overcompensation to overcome these feelings of anxiety. You know what? Some people get big cars. Some people get fancy clothes. Some people get big houses, bigger than they need. And he argued that people are driven to do this because of feelings of inferiority, right? Now, a third needs-based theory was created by a student of Freud's named Karen Horney. And she argued that people are motivated by a need for security, and they use relationships to achieve these feelings of security. If any of you have ever felt lonely or sad or neglected or not loved by people, you know how powerful that negative feeling is. We all want to have a feeling that there are people looking out for us and taking care of this. You have a need for security. And he argued that some people are so overwhelmed by this need for security that they develop codependent personalities. Anybody ever heard of a codependent person? This is a person that can't make decisions without other people's help. They need other people to act as crutches for them. And Karen Horney was the person who identified the codependent personality. So you can think of one theory of motivation is that human beings have these internal needs that drive them. Freud would say this internal need is the need for sexual gratification. Alfred Adler would say that we're all driven by a need for power. And Karen Horney would say that we're all driven by a need for security and safety. So these are all needs-based theories. Now, which one of these theories do you think is the one that drives human being? Do you think it's about sex? Do you think it's about power? Or do you think it's about security? I'd be curious to hear your opinion. If you could, in the chat bar, tell me which one of these is the true need that drives people. Which one of these is right? Does anybody have an opinion? Does anybody have an opinion? And I'll wait for an answer right here. I'm even going to check my phone while I'm waiting. Holy cow, I have tons of emails that bumped up. I feel like it varies. I was hoping you would say that, Amber. I was hoping somebody would say that, because that moves us to our next theory. Has anybody ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Anybody ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You probably never heard the backstory of how Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Christine says maybe none of them. Suha says maybe all of them. And Amber says it varies. If you said that it's all of them or maybe it's none of them, you, my friends, would believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow was a theory that followed after these people, and he said, wait a minute. It's not just one need. People aren't driven by one need. People are driven by lots of needs. And so he argued that we really ought to think about human beings as being driven by tons of needs. And you see this little triangle right here. This is Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs. And he argues that human beings have lots of needs. And really what we have to do is we have to fulfill all these needs. But he argues some needs are more important, or what he called prepotent, than others. So he argued that human beings have what we would call D needs and B needs. D needs are what he called deficit needs, and B needs are what we would call being needs. So if you think about it, we all have to have food, water, and warmth and oxygen and sleep. These are sort of the most fundamental needs that humans have. And if you're thirsty, if you're hungry, or if you're freezing, really sex isn't going to be that important to you. Fitting in with your group of people isn't going to be important. Instead, you're going to be driven by these physiological needs. Now, he argues once we fulfill these needs, we then, a different set of needs become prepotent, are important for us. And these needs are safety needs, the need for security and the protection and freedom from harm. If you think about it, this is sort of what Karen Horney would say was most important. And Maslow says that once you have the food and water taken care of, we are then interested in achieving feelings of security and safety. Now, once we have these things, we then, he argues, move up to another set of needs become prepotent. And these are the needs for fitting in, for having friends, and for having a family that loves you, right? And these are what we would call acceptance needs. Now, he argues if we have enough food and water, if we feel safe, and if we have families that need and love us, we are then driven by the need to feel good about ourselves, to achieve things, to have people think well of us. And he called these things esteem needs. And he says that that need then becomes prepotent. Now, all of these needs, physiological, safety, belonging, and esteem, are what he called D needs. He argued that these needs drive us until we fulfill them. He argues, however, some people focus excessively on these needs, and these people can become neurotic. So I don't know if you've ever seen somebody who spends all their time thinking about food and eating. These people, in a sense, can become neurotic about food and drinking and these other things. Some people are so focused on feelings of safety that they become neurotic and codependent. Some people are so interested in being accepted that they will do anything to be accepted. And sometimes they do neurotic things to be accepted. And some people have such a need for other people to like them that they spend all of their time on Facebook bragging so that people will think they're cool. He argues that excessive focus on any of these D needs can lead to neurosis and mental health problems. He argues that the true actualized person, once you achieve all these dreams, he says the true healthy person then becomes driven by their dreams, by the need to do things because they will make you feel whole and they will make you feel like you are living your fullest life. So we might ask ourselves, why in the hell does Alex Honnold feel the need to climb 3,000 feet up cliffs, even though one mistake can cause him his life? Maslow would argue that this is because he is driven by the need to feel self-actualized, to truly feel alive and fulfill his personality. So why am I driven by the need to teach and be a cool teacher? Because it fulfills my potential as a human being. He would argue that I'm trying to become self-actualized. And Maslow studied lots of historical figures that did really cool things like painted paintings or wrote books or cured diseases. And he argued that these people were driven by the need for self-actualization. And he argued that this need is a being need. You can never get too much of this need. He argued, in fact, that some people that fulfill all of these D needs and then can't find a way to realize their potential, these people too also suffer from mental illness. So according to Maslow, and I would argue with Amber and Suha, he argued that human beings are driven by lots of needs, and the need that drives you depends upon what you haven't fulfilled yet. If you're hungry, you're driven by the need for food. If you're afraid, you're driven by the need for safety. If you're lonely, you're driven by the need for belongingness. If you have all these needs fulfilled, you're driven by the need for people to think well of you. And if you have all of these needs fulfilled, you then have to find the need to fulfill your potential drives you. And so what I want you to do is to think of the human beings as being driven by these needs, by these feelings that never, ever go away. And these are what we would call needs-based theories, okay? Now, so what I want to do is go back and think about this. Remember, motivations are what separates you from computers. They are the things that activate your behavior, they direct your behavior, they sustain your behavior, and we also have them in different quantities, with some people being more motivated than are other people. Now, sometimes these motivations come from the external world. You go to work to get paid. You do what your mom says because you don't want to get spanked by your mom and dad, right? Sometimes people are driven by external motivators. On the other hand, sometimes people are driven by things that are inside them. What drives us from the inside? The need to maintain a feeling of homeostasis. the need to maintain the optimal level of arousal, or sometimes we're driven by these internal drives called needs that never go away. So, what I want you to appreciate from today's lecture is that human beings are driven by these forces that just don't seem to go away. And when you look all over the world and you see people doing art or doing bad things or doing good things or climbing mountains or writing books, it's because they have these motivational forces that are inside us that drive us. Does anybody have any questions about today's lecture? I'd like to thank everybody for being motivated enough to come to my class. And I'd be curious, why were you motivated to come to this class? What motivated you to come here today? Was it because you needed somebody to talk to? Did you need some friendship? Or did you come because you want to be an A student? Or did you come because this class is really interesting and keeps you from being bored? I'd be curious to know what motivated you to come here today. Sit and think about that today and let me know later today via text why you came to class today. And let's think about our motivations as we move through the day today. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. Don't forget webinars Wednesday night and Thursday night. I'd love to see you there. And I'll have the exams graded by tonight at midnight. And if you can't make it to webinar on Wednesday, I will see you Thursday morning if you're motivated enough to come here. Y'all have a great day. Take care, and I'll see you on Wednesday or Thursday. Bye.